Hi everyone, this is Rachel back with the Shades of Orange, and today I'm here to bring you the best books of 2022 so far. This video I'm only going to be focusing on new releases, so no backlist titles. If you want to hear my favorites of those, you're going to have to subscribe and wait till the end of the year. And in terms of genre, I'm talking about thrillers, horror, and true crime, so all of my favorite stabby books. And if you want to hear more about my science fiction and fantasy favorites, you can definitely go check out the video that I posted before. But as I said in that video, I really like to do this video early enough in the year just because I don't want to completely spoil my end of the year favorites, but instead give you a preview of some of the best books I've read so far. And then hopefully if you're interested, you could actually come back to this video later on and see if the books that I talked about here end up at the end of the year making the final top 10 list. All that being said, let's get started. First, let's talk about my top 3 thrillers, and at the number 3 spot we have the Book of Cold Cases by Simone St. James. And this is a story that's told over a few different timelines. We have the past and present, and within the story we follow a young woman who as a child experienced a horrible crime. She was the victim of something terrible, and in order to cope with that she has turned to an obsession of true crime herself. She has started up a blog as an adult and gets really obsessed with different cases. This novel particularly follows one case that she's investigating. She gets the opportunity to interview a woman who was accused of a crime, and of course because we get the past and the present, you also get to find out what actually happened with that case, and slowly it's unveiled. This is a story that was really entertaining to read. I did on audio and I flew through it quite quickly over the course of a weekend. I found it to be very entertaining, very well paced, and just an interesting story. I've read this author before, and if you're a fan of her other book, The Broken Girls, I do think that you will enjoy this one as well. Personally, I most enjoy the aspect of the true crime blog and wish that that had been a larger part of the story, but I was still very invested in this one and found it very fun. I will be honest that if I have a concern with putting this on the list, it's the fact that I don't know how memorable this book's going to be. So while I'm still thinking about it now because I just read it a few weeks ago, I think that later in the year when I'm compiling my list in December, I'm not quite sure if it's going to hold up and be as memorable by the time I get to the end of the year, but we shall see. And for now, it definitely is one I would recommend. I do think it's one of the better thrillers that's come out this year so far. Then at number 2 we have The Overnight Guest by Heather Gudenkoff, and this follows a true crime writer, so a similar theme, who is working and writing in a isolated cottage or cabin out in the woods on a cold winter day. She hears something, goes outside to find out that there is a child, and of course has to investigate where that child is from, where are their parents, and the story goes from there. The story is also told over a few different perspectives, and it's an interesting one because when I was reading it, I had no idea how the perspectives were going to interconnect. I knew that they had to, but it didn't really occur to me how they were going to fit until the connections were actually made, so I found it to be very well plotted. I've read this author before and I do find her to be a really good storyteller, and while I didn't know where this book was going, I wasn't able to predict any of the conclusions, I just had a really good time reading it. I thought it was a lot of fun and just enjoyed going along for the ride. I thought the characters were very entertaining, and it was really fun to get to see this woman awkwardly trying to interact with this child and not doing a very good job. So overall, I thought this one was fun. I enjoyed again the fact that she was a true crime writer, although again it wasn't a large part of the plot, but overall really fun, and I would definitely recommend it. And finally, at the number 1 spot for thrillers, we have A Flicker in the Dark by Stacey Willingham. And this story follows a woman who, as a child, her father was accused of murdering 6 young teenage girls and was sent to jail for that. We now follow her as an adult, and she, of course, is trying to move away from her pained past. She is now working as a successful psychologist. She is about to get married, but of course, her past is starting to catch up with her. Another young girl goes missing and appears to possibly be a copycat, and so she gets reached out to by a journalist, and she just has to kind of dig into her past, and perhaps things were more complicated than they appeared to be. This is a book that I really enjoyed. I just found it really entertaining. I remember that I did properly predict what was going on and the twist within this book, And so I can't claim that this book is really innovative or out of the box or an ending that you'll never see coming. But what I think worked so well for me is that the author made me feel super duper smart for figuring it out. And I'm not sure if I'm just a really brilliant thriller reader or if the author just gave us enough breadcrumbs that I felt just really satisfied that I put it all together without feeling like it was so obvious. This was just a well-paced story. I thought the characters were likable, a plot setup that is perhaps something I've seen many times before, but is one that I never get tired of. I love the child of a serial killer having to deal with their past. This book is just a really entertaining read that, again, I flew through and found to be very satisfying. It was one of the first 2022 releases that I actually liked, if I'm honest, and so definitely it has really strong, warm memories in my mind, and so at the moment it's definitely in the top spot for the thriller genre. Now, moving over to true crime, a genre that I have a hit or miss relationship with, but this year I've really fallen back in love with it. So I have two books to highlight here. The first one is When a Killer Calls by John E. Douglas, and this is one I recently talked about but is worth talking about again. This is a book by the well-known author of the book Mindhunters. He, of course, was one of the men who brought about creating the subunit of the FBI that does the criminal profiling and basically created the whole idea of doing behavioral criminal profiling in the first place. And so within the story, it follows one particular case that we follow from the event of the kidnapping of this young woman. She is held captive by this man. This man goes on to call her parents and torture them over the phone with the details of what is happening. And then, as the title of this book suggests, things do not end well in this case. And so then we follow the events afterwards. They are able to track down this man, largely using, again, profiling. They are able to come up with a case of who this person was and identify them and have people within the public able to point a finger and realize who was behind it all. So they catch the person, they bring them to the legal system, and we follow them through the case. And I thought it was just really interesting. In the past, my complaint with this author's true crime work is that he typically talks about several cases in the course of one book. And in this case, I like that we only focus on one case. We really get to follow it again from beginning to end. And I love the author's commentary. I thought that it was really insightful. I learned a lot. I learned a lot that was new, which again, I find with true crime books, often they talk about the same things over and over again, but it actually brought new insight that I wasn't familiar with. And as I said before, I like that this book is very victim focused and really does not glamorize the perpetrator in any way, and instead really shows how despicable his crimes were and really holds him responsible for what he did. So I thought it was very well done, very gripping. I flew through it. I think I read it in one day because I could not put it down. So obviously highly recommend if you can handle that subject matter. Then at the number one spot for true crime, we have Tell Me Everything by Erica Krause. And this is a different kind of true crime book because it reads more like a memoir. We follow a young woman who doesn't have any formal education in the legal system or in police work, nothing like that, but she is just really good at getting people to tell her things. And so she ends up getting hired by a legal firm that is going after a university where there is a large string of sexual assaults and rapes that have been conducted that involve the star athletes of the university, and so they are taking a legal case and suing the university itself for misconduct and just allowing all of this to happen. And so we follow this woman, and again, this is all true, who works as a private investigator. So her job was to interview all of the victims of these crimes and to get them to talk, to share their story, and to provide evidence so that they could take this legal case to court. And I thought it was a very interesting story. First, as I've said before, I think that the idea of work as a private investigator is absolutely fascinating because, of course, you don't have the legal standings of someone who is a police officer or working for the federal government, but you're still trying to get people to give you evidence and so forth. I think that is super interesting as work. And of course, the case itself was very compelling. I don't want to say that I enjoyed this book because it's very difficult. It's very frustrating to read about everything that happened, everyone that put a blind eye towards what was going on, and the awful atrocities atrocities that happen. But I will say that I felt this book handled those difficult content aspects very well. I don't think that the author tried to be overly triggering, and instead really focuses on the victims and the fallout and their challenges of trying to move on, trying to get justice. And this book is just very compelling. I think it's very important, very topical for today. And I really want to shine light on a true crime book like this because I feel like most of the books in the genre tend to focus around murderers, and so I do think that it's quite interesting to have a book that focuses on a different kind of crime, which is just as despicable, but again, a different focus that often doesn't get as much light and much attention as it should online. And we've made it to the last category, which is my favorite horror of 2022 so far. And I will be totally honest with you all that the reason that this video got delayed being published is the fact that I was really struggling to put books in this category that I felt really comfortable with, because while they're only my favorites of the year so far, I still want to recommend books that I honestly do think are worth your time, worth picking up, whether it be from the library or purchasing with your own money. And in terms of new releases for horror, I struggled a lot this year, which you might be aware of if you've already followed my channel. But oh my goodness, it was a tough year, but I'm really happy to say that I have 3 books that I definitely do think deserve a spot on this list, and I'll be interested to see whether or not they make my final list, because I definitely have a lot more reading to do before we get to the end of the year and again publish that good old top 10 stabby books of the year for 2022. All that being said, let's get started with this category. So first, at the number 3 spot, we have A Black and Endless Sky by Matthew Lyons. And this story follows a brother and sister that go on a road trip. The brother has just gone through a divorce and his sister is helping him to start over. They are moving, and so they're going on this road trip with all their stuff. They go through the desert, and as you would expect, terrible things ensue. What happens is that the sister disappears, she wanders off, and when she comes back, well, she just does not seem like herself. This is a book that is a really good mix between a survival type narrative and also ties in elements of a possible possession, which you know I love. I will be totally honest with you, at the beginning of this book started out really slow, and I wasn't sure if it was up my alley. But I'm really glad that I stuck it out, because once the story got going around the 50% mark for me, I got really invested in it. And usually I'm not someone who gets invested midway through a book. If the start doesn't grab me, typically I'm lost on the book to begin with. But in this case, I got really gripped in. It introduced some different characters, a possible villain, and I got really excited. I love the introduction of the other character. As I've said before, I basically started cheering for the villain and wanted them to win. And this book just got really intense, really exciting. And again, it fell into some of the tropes that I really enjoy when it comes to possible possession. I'll leave it there whether or not that actually happens. But I got super gripped in. I thought it had a great climax, and I was completely glued to the second half of this book. So in this case, I would say that if you're interested in picking this up, give it a try, and if the beginning feels slow, continue on, push through, and I really hope that you'll have the same experience and find this book is well worth it when it comes to the payoff in the climax. So obviously one that I recommend here. Then at the number 2 spot, we have Dance Among the Flames by Tori Elridge. And this story follows a young woman who is living in Brazil. She is a single mother. She is desperate. She is of poor economic and social status. And she ends up bringing in and calling on to this mysticism, these magical entities, these Brazilian gods, in order to help her and bring her power and strength and help her to rise up from her place in society. I want to leave the story a little bit vague just because I find the back of the book doesn't give a lot away, and so I don't want to either. But I will say that this book is one that you'll want to check out if you share my love for fierce, feminist, Latino horror, which seems to be its own subgenre these days. So if you enjoy things like some of my favorites like Goddess of Filth and also Weep Woman Weep, which I both read last year, this one gave me similar vibes to that. This one really deals with difficult themes of abuse and oppression, and again the struggles of being in a lower social class and all sorts of different very topical issues. It also deals a lot with sexuality and especially the female experience to that. And I think it's just, again, like fiercely feminist is the words I always want to use when I describe these books. And so I really did enjoy that. In terms of the narrative, I found it to be a little bit more disjointed, and I do think I get a little bit picky with these books because I've read so many. But overall, I really did enjoy this one. And if you're wondering, well, why didn't you review this on your channel yet? It's because it's coming out soon. And in order to put together this video list, I decided to do some pre-reading. So if you want my longer thoughts on this book, I'll be talking about it in a future upcoming review video. But I want to give you a preview here that if you're looking for the best horror that I've read so far this year, this is on the list. And I think that a lot of you that share my taste in horror are really going to enjoy this one as well. And finally, at the #1 spot, we have Girl in the Corn by Jason Offutt. And this is a story that follows a young boy who, as a child, sees this little fairy in the corn, and he goes about talking to her. And of course, at first you think it's just the child's imagination, but as you would expect, this fairy sticks with him as he gets older and he sees her again. You find out there's a larger story going on, and this is what I would describe as epic horror. It's the kind of narrative where there is a really bigger plot going on, there is a lot more happening, and it feels just very big in terms of scope. Even though the book itself is not overly long, I found this book to be very compelling, very engaging. I found it very entertaining. It is a little bit more tropey in the way that I mean that it's a little bit predictable, but in a way that I found very comforting and very, again, entertaining. And so I don't think it's the scariest horror book I have read, but it easily is one that hits all those buttons of the things that I personally love to see in my horror books. And if you're wondering, yes, while this is technically a fairy book, it's a fairy book for those of you, like myself, that do not like fairy books. So yes, someone has finally managed to pull off a fairy book that is actually horror and not urban fantasy. This book is definitely in the genre that I'm putting it in. I think a lot of people that share my taste in horror are really going to enjoy this one. It was so much fun, and I obviously highly recommend it since it made my #1 spot for the year so far. And again, I'll be interested to look back on this video later in the year and see when I make my end of the year videos, will these books hold up in the #1 spot, or will better books come along that will knock them down a few ranks? So stay tuned for all of that. So that is it for this video here. I'd love to hear of the books I talked about, which ones are you planning on checking out for yourself? And I would also love to hear what is the best either thriller, true crime, or horror book that you have read that was published in 2022. If you're new to my channel, please consider subscribing. I do read all these genres as well as adult science fiction and fantasy. Again, if you want to hear about my best science fiction fantasy, do check out the video that will be linked down below. And if you enjoy these genres, if you want to hear more about them, definitely encourage you to subscribe, stick around, because I'm going to be, as I mentioned, reading a lot more new releases as the year goes on, and I'm hopefully going to tell you which ones are worth the hype and which ones are not. Otherwise, if you want to help me out and support this video, you can give me a thumbs up, share this around online, drop a comment, even if just a stack of books. And if you hit that little notification bell, you'll never miss another video from me. Thanks so much for watching. I'll talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.